Commissioners. This morning we're going to have our first budget workshop as we look toward the 17-18 fiscal year, and I want to thank you for your continued leadership in helping to prioritize budget options as we make difficult choices to keep our city on strong financial footing. And as we've moved out of the recession, we've been in a strong position relative to some of the other cities around the country. But that doesn't mean we have a windfall of funding as the state legislature continues to figure out ways to restrict our growth or figure out new ways with a new property tax amendment to limit our revenues. So last year we did have an increase in revenues, and we put them into public safety and parks and rec and infrastructure. And today you'll see the preliminary numbers in the manner that we hope to direct them, all without raising our millage rate once again. So Brian Battles, our Deputy CFO, who's in charge of our budget, is here to begin the process. Brian?
Morning, Mayor and Commissioners. Appreciate you taking the time again, as always, as we approach this budget cycle. I know we've had a lot of conversations to get to this point. So this is, again, talking about, I wanted to take us through a couple of things with where we are in our current budget, some of the driving principles behind that, as well as you know, we stay very active year-round with our budget review committee and the adjustments that we make. So again, there's some adjustments that we've made to our current 17 budget, which really gets us to that starting point for developing our 18 budget, both general fund and other funds, and then taking through some next steps in our calendar as we go forward these next couple months. So again, our current budget, one of the things, as we talked about, is we made sure we recognized the new revenues from all of the increased economic activity that we were experiencing. We finally had our property tax, the revenue side was higher than our pre-recession levels. We restored our infrastructure and facility maintenance funding that we had reduced many years back. We increased staffing where economic conditions demanded. We increased police officers' presence, both by unfreezing officers as well as increasing staff count at the airport. We created a transportation department, and in the current budget, we increased contingency levels more than we would in our normal cycles, really to handle those union negotiations that were ongoing at the time. Since then, we've allocated for what have already been approved to the various departments, but still that was part of this design of the current budget. So as you'll see the numbers, we're at about $424 million from the general fund, and our other funds are about $750 million. Again, we're required to have balanced budgets and keep them balanced as we make these amendments and go through the year. So that's where they were adopted, and as we went forward, they're continuing to be in balance. Again, the Budget Review Committee is a large part of our year-round cycle to address constituent and community needs right away. We're not coming to you once a year during this budget time to kind of figure out what our plan is for next year. We're constantly evolving and making sure we're reacting as we go forward through the year, and this Budget Review Committee lets us do that. As evident by the multi-million-dollar sums of money throughout the various areas that we've increased throughout the year. As you see, we've added almost $2 million in grants, and those grants have gone to a variety of departments, from public safety, transportation, parks. We added some impact fees from the transportation area to improve our road capacity and fulfilled some developer commitments of over $1 million. Water reclamation projects, wastewater, almost $5 million in projects to continue that infrastructure investment. And stormwater projects to continue to protect our environment at over $8 million. And again, there's a few other variety of smaller impacts that we've done, from cleanup to funds to making sure our budget aligns with our accounting, to just some other smaller transfers here and there as we've went through the year. So this is, again, kind of a starting place of where we are going to begin with the 18 development. Staff is the same thing. We're not waiting to just do this one time a year. We're making sure we're adding, as evident by the 10 positions out of the 18 in economic development. 8 of them were related to the building code and the permitting functions. You see general fund had some additional increases. Again, some of those were in economic development. And then from water reclamation, solid waste, CRA all added 1 each. So these staffing enhancements were all built into the base budget that we're kind of presenting as our working draft as of today. So some of the increases that you may see later on in the presentation may not be attributable to just year-to-year asks, but also everything that's developed within during this and throughout this year. So as we move to 18, I will say the numbers, I think, look pretty specific, but that doesn't mean they're not in flux and still very much working numbers as we continue to fine-tune both our capital programs, our revenue estimates, and our expense estimates, as well as just dig deeper into the numbers and make sure that we didn't miss anything or there wasn't something that happens, this month or next month that we also want to address. So at the high level for the general fund, these are some of our revenue categories that we used to see. There'll be slides on many of these going in the next couple slides, but the big one, obviously, that has been our driver and our ability to kind of address the needs of our community is ad valorem taxes, or our property taxes. As you see, the change is about $19 million in growth. Some of that is taken on the flip side, on the expense side, because some of that will have to be increased contributions to our community redevelopment agency. But as a growth, the city experienced almost 12% revenue growth in ad valorem taxes. Intergovernmental, again, another one of the increases. The largest portion of this is related to our continued relationship with OUC, as you'll see from franchise and dividend payments that they've presented and worked a plan to make sure that we're continuing to foster that relationship financially as we go forward. Some other, just a couple, $100,000 here, $100,000 there that will go through. The other one that I wanted to point out is transfers in. It is down almost $3 million, but it's really more of an accounting issue for us and how we're tracking staff. We've moved some of the staff that traditionally have been housed in the general fund, but 100% supported from other funds, into those other funds. So instead of holding a position that really had no general fund involvement financially on the general fund's books, we're putting it to those other funds. So instead of the transfer, now you'll just see it in those other ones. So again, year over year, this is general fund. We're looking at about a $22.5 million increase, or 5.31%. On the property tax side, these are the projections, and they're based on the most recent DR 420 form that we got from the property appraiser. As you'll see with the light blue line, we're finally back over our pre-recession highs. So it took us about a decade to get back here from that standpoint. The dark blue is the $1 million that we levied a few years back. But again, we're planning on keeping the millage rate the same at 6.65 with this upcoming budget. Utilities, services tax, and communication tax really just down slightly based on we're continuing to see a decline in communication service tax, both from the state estimates as well as what we're seeing as actuals and our own internal estimates related to just the usage of that and what the communication service tax is levied. Sales tax is showing some growth. Again, this is our conservative estimate. The state actually just released some estimates that are a little bit higher than what we are showing or what we are anticipating, but we also don't like to get ahead of ourselves in what our actual collections are. But even with that, we are projecting an increase of almost $1 million. Municipal revenue sharing, again, just a slight increase, but the upward trend is happening. Again, this just relates to the overall economy as a whole that we're experiencing in the state. And this is our share of some of the sale and use taxes that the state allocates. Local business tax, we are projecting, I would say, a healthy growth of almost roughly about 8%. In this one, it does, we're continuing to reconcile the strong growth that we've had, but also wanting to make sure we're not growing too drastically and that the sustainability of the economy is here. But we, again, are recognizing that increased contribution. As I noted, OUC, we are showing an increase related to the agreements and relationship that we have related to the electric franchise fees and dividend payments. So again, a couple other, just the revenue ones, I think I touched on these already. The franchise fees, we are showing a decrease slightly. I think it's a lot more just because of the energy conservation efforts that the public is doing. And then the transfers in and charge for service I talked about how we're allocating staff time. So at this point, with our working numbers, we're looking at, again, how that 22.5 gets allocated across the departments. You'll see from magnitude with police and fire both having the most significant dollar increases, $10 million and $5 million respectively, related to just our continued emphasis on those public safety in the realm of our general fund as we go forward. Some of the other items mostly are related to just staff or just some of the decisions that we've made along the way. The business and financial service increase is heavily a result of some of our IT contracts and some of the licenses that we have and our continued move towards that digital domain and technology era that we want to make sure that we stay ahead of the curve in. Just a breakdown again, as you'll see, police and fire are the largest components of our general fund by department. So nothing has changed from the aspect of what portion of the pie that these two departments are receiving. Is still the largest chunk, showing our commitment to those organizations. Breaking down the general fund a little bit further, some of the expenditures by use. As you'll see, salary and benefits make up, almost $17 million of that $22.5 million increase. So related to continuing both our wages that we've agreed to in the previous labor negotiations, as well as our benefits. And I'll get a little bit more into the benefits because I think there's an interesting story to tell on those. But on the one thing I would also like to point out is we are seeing a decrease in utilities. So this is really for us related more to the street lights. Now most of them, or not, the vast majority of them have been replaced with the LED lights. And now that OUC kind of staggered that throughout the community, we're finally seeing, as a full reign of all of our street lights, we're seeing that utility savings. And though the increase in capital, while it looks like a high percentage, it's not a big dollar figure, but this is really related to an operating capital increase related to the transportation department and making sure that we can fit out the 9th floor of City Hall for when the City Hall renovations are complete, and make sure they have a permanent home. So this isn't one of those capital projects that is out in the community, so we've left it on the operating side. But that's why you're seeing that increase here. That will go down in the future. So the benefits detail slide, I really just wanted to point out again, a large portion, almost 43% of our general fund increase is related to benefit costs. In recent years, we've seen the state mandate and actuarial changes related to mortality tables. We've adjusted our assumed rate of return. So you can kind of see some of these graphs as our benefit number continues to grow. One of the things I did want to point out is if you look at the graph on the right, the other benefits, even though it's the same percentage of larger pie, it still stayed relatively stable at 27%, whereas our health insurance as a proportion of benefits has actually gone down, and then our retirement and post-employment has gone up. Next, I just wanted to highlight a few of the other funds. From a summary standpoint, just again, these are in the working budget. What you're seeing from some of these increases, this budget is planning on waiving both the water reclamation and the solid waste inflationary fee potential increases. The CRA operating fund is experiencing almost 40% growth related, and will continue to focus on project DTO implementation. Parking fund has increased growth as well. A lot of it's related from just an operational change of moving the Geico garage from Orlando venues from a management structure to our parking department or our transportation department. And then also there's a slight decrease related to the under-eye surface lots being closed. The building code from adopted to adopted is showing a decrease. That's really just a result of last year we had a heavy use of fund balance related to the EDIS project, and that was not included in this budget. So the decrease from an operational side is not occurring, but fund to fund is. Crossing guard, we're showing an increase related to new locations for some of the new schools, mainly along Westmoreland and Amelia, some of those crossing across the streets. So there is a growth there. again, the healthcare fund, we are showing a 2% growth, but really this is attributable to just staff increases and number of people. We are planning on keeping our premiums the same, so 0% premium increase. So this increase is not related to changing our plan or adding more premium or increasing that premium level, but it's really just a result of the makeup of our city staff. And here are some of those numbers and some of those percentages, just from a breakdown in these other funds. I think I touched on most of them. The two that I would like to point out are stormwater and water reclamation. Really, these are related to the capital programs. One, that we're still fine-tuning, but two, as you noted from the earlier slide, related to the Budget Review Committee, we were allocating millions of dollars in both of those two funds to projects, so we weren't waiting for this budget, and because of that, we essentially jump-started some of those areas, which is why you're showing slight decrease related to those two funds. So next steps in our budget calendar. Today, again, in our working numbers, I am proud and pleased to essentially present a balanced budget on both the general fund and for other funds. I will, reiterate that we're continuing to fine-tune that budget as we go forward with both estimates and as well as just working through the nuances of our expenditure and our capital programs. But at this point in time, I think it's good to point out that we are balanced, so we can get to where we need to get to as we continue to focus on our priorities. Just a few next steps from the meeting standpoint. We have another workshop in a couple of weeks. Between that, we also have the Mayor's State of the City address, which will have some budget priorities outlined. In really this month and in August and in September, we're available and we'll continue to meet with each of you on our budget recommendations, as well as the larger kind of budget notebook that we present will be given to council and to the public at that July 24th workshop. And then September, we have our two public hearings, both for the resolutions and as we finalize our budget and millage rate. And that is the end of the formal presentation. I know I ran through these numbers fairly quickly, so I'd be happy to take any questions, and I have both our staff as well as I think some city staff members here. If there's
it seems like this is the start of the process, but Brian and team have been working on next year's budget for 6 months or so, really after we got into this new fiscal year, and the rest of the process is you guys should be happy. I'm combining the budget address with a State of the City address, so you only have to sit through one of those instead of two of those. So I'll do that the Friday before we have the workshop and adopt a proposed millage rate, which we will formally adopt in September. So we'll have a proposed budget at the end of this month. You'll have August to figure out any modifications we might need to make to that, and then we'll have our two formal hearings in September. So questions, comments? I think Commissioner Stewart, you were first.
Thank you, Mayor, and let me just congratulate you and the entire team. I didn't get a chance, Mayor, if they've been a chance to recognize them and thank them personally. If I missed that, I'd love to do that. I'm going to start from the back and go forward. So on the selected fund expenditures, at $767 million is money that's coming in direct revenue outside of what we've got. Example is money for the venues. It's really money that's created by the venues and so as a revenue stream. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, this is all the non-general fund areas.
Okay.
And we just highlighted a few of the funds here. We have roughly 100 or so separate funds, 150 separate funds, and then we roll them together. So we kind of have that catch-all line at the bottom, but this picture is just the non-general fund side of our operation.
You're moving stuff around. I understand that. So, but at first glance, this looks like we're $4.4 million less in Orlando venues than we are this year.
Correct.
And that's a function of what?
That's a function of just the estimates on events and expenditures, but also a function on moving the Geico garage, which the Geico garage was carrying a significant, or was carrying debt as well related to that. So moving the debt, moving that out. Yes.
So we aren't seeing any major operational changes as best you could estimate right now, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
The biggest piece of that is the debt service.
Yeah, the debt service
Right,
on the
pulling
garage.
it back out. And that makes a lot of sense. There was one other question I had. Let me get it real quick. Public safety is at right about 56% of the total general budget. And we've got a $10 million increase in police, but you only show one police officer increase? Is that?
So
trying to
we're,
understand that.
right now for the 18 budget, we're still working through what the staff changes or staff enhancements will be. The one in police is related to the budget review committee, and that was actually for a fiscal and management analyst. If you remember at the beginning, the current budget, the 17 budget, we unfroze 15 positions, so allowed for basically funded 15 positions, as well as increased GOAS count by 12. So we're right now we're still looking through potential enhancements to the police operation and the fire
Okay, I'm
operation.
just trying to understand and say it in layman's terms, because you. So we have 27 positions that are greater than the previous year in the current budget year.
In the 17 budget.
Right. And then next budget year is how many additional? We don't know.
We're still working through those.
Okay. All right. So and
We're trying to maximize our commitment to public safety.
There will be an enhancement to the number of
Right.
police officers.
and also the challenge is the ability to we can budget but not be able to fill the position, which is in just the time it takes to get somebody in. So it's in the budget but not necessarily filled. Okay. The last question was. Explain to me again on the sales tax and the revenue sharing, municipal revenue sharing. That's a percentage that's determined by the state of Florida, isn't it? In which we take
Correct.
like
There's a
26% of whatever they think the estimate is, or something like that.
There's a pretty robust formula that talks about population and collections and divvies that money up accordingly. Correct.
Okay. And then I guess the last question before I get off is that generally speaking, I know this is all very macro right now, but we have an increase, significant increase in the CRA. And so the question is, what is our debt service in the CRA that can be able to pay that down, or what's our plan, I guess, generally speaking?
So I'll say for the most of the debt service, especially the debt service that's related to the interlocal agreement, paying some of that down would trigger some potentially closing the CRAs, and so that's not on our plan to do.
Okay. All right. Again, thank you. Thank you for your work. Thank you for the chance we had to spend together, and we'll get a chance to spend some more time together. And thank you to your entire staff. This is hard and difficult work, and I appreciate it.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Sheehan?
Well, to quote Sam Bear, tires ain't pretty and budgets ain't pretty, but this one's prettier than they have been in the past few years, so thank you. Which is probably why it's part of your study, the city mayor, because it's not bad news for a change. But something that I think we really need to continue telling the story of, though, is what the difference in revenues would have been if not for the state-imposed tax caps. And so if we could have a chart with that, because I think people have I think people really don't understand with property taxes how much we've had to cut, Mayor. And I think that's really important, especially with the additional homestead that is probably going to pass. Again, that people understand the level of cutting that we've had to do because of these state legislated tax caps. And if it had not been for the growth, we would not be in this situation. I mean, at least we've got some places to grow. And we've had some big ticket, redevelopment happening throughout the city. But if it had been for that growth, we wouldn't be in this situation. So, and we are a city. We only have so much room to grow. But thanks to my colleague on the right, we have a lot going on in Lake Nona, but we also have a lot going on at Universal. We have some infill development going on, in the central core. But if not for that, we wouldn't be in this situation. And the one thing that I would like to say is if we could please have some money to fix the potholes. That's the one thing I hear from people over and over and over again, that we really need to, those are those core services that affect people day in, day out. And if we can, if we find a few spare extra dollars, if we could figure out some way to prioritize that would be my District 4 ask. Thank you, Mayor.
And the brick roads.
And the brick streets, absolutely. Thank you, Commissioner.
Commissioner Ings?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Brian. Appreciate the budget report on today, but I guess I was concerned about code enforcement because I didn't see any increased staffing in the budget review enhancements for code enforcement. There were nothing that indicated there was a need for personnel or anything like that. So where are the increased staffing needs for code enforcement, and have they been addressed in this budget process?
We currently do not have code enforcement enhancements related in this budget that we're presenting today.
Yeah, and see, and that's the problem that I'm experiencing out in the community, because there are not enough code enforcement officers to go around, and so a lot of issues dealing with community is not being dealt with, especially with vacant housing and lot cleaning situations, buildings that are coming up in the neighborhood, and they don't have any kind of permits or anything like that, but yet they're establishing themselves as businesses. And then also on your select funds expenditures, I did see the building code enforcement section there, that there was a decrease of about 20%, minus $3 million or $3.2 million.
Correct, and again, that's really related to the capital initiatives that the building code undertook in the current budget. It is not related to staffing or operational. The operational side of the house is actually increasing.
Okay. Okay.
We just had some one-time capital outflows in last year's budget. Our investment in the EDIS software being one of them.
Okay.
So, but the operation itself is growing.
Operation is growing.
Correct.
All right. Is Mike Rhodes here this morning? Is he here? No? Because I wanted him to hear that.
The building code and permitting is the operation is growing.
Okay. All right. And Commissioner Sheehan mentioned potholes, but we also have street flooding that's going on out there, and not enough funding to take care of that. So I don't know where Public Works is in dealing with that type of situation, but we need to kind of look at that as well. I'm not trying to increase the budget or anything. You guys have done a super job, and where we are now, I feel so comfortable with where we are as opposed to where we have been. And where
You mean
really
it's nice
struggled.
to start out pretty much balanced versus
Right.
20 or 30 million
Yeah.
dollars in the hole?
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was also thinking, Mary, it would really be nice if we had moved back the millage rate if we're doing this great, but we'll just hold on for now, right?
Oh, no, we're about to get another hit.
All right, we'll hold on.
Well, I will say, our goal is to keep it and make it as easy for everyone in the public and for us to make these decisions. I mean, as the mayor talked about, we've been making tough decisions with the departments for the last 6 months on what we can get into this clean picture for you all.
Well, that's one thing that I spoke to you about probably last week or so, you and Martin, and that was that staff has really been at this, Mayor, for quite some time, starting even after the old budget year and the new budget year started, and especially cranking up in January. So staff has to be commended. And that's throughout all of the departments?
Correct.
That's throughout
Definitely.
all of the departments, not just within budget, but all of the departments are doing a great job.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Stewart?
One last question. I know that we're seeing significant additional cost in personnel, and I think we've done a great job in healthcare, and I appreciate that. For the sake of those that are listening, and also a little bit for my education, 27% of the budget for personnel is in other benefits. I'd like to just, when you get a chance, break that down a little bit more. I think some of that's the OPEB money that we put in when we hire somebody, and there's some other things that occur along in that 27% in other benefits there. I'm looking at the benefits detail that you have with the little graph.
Correct. Yep. Yes, sir. Yeah, I mean, we can break it down. We do have other, some of the benefits that are not in these major categories are like life insurance or LTD, long-term disability. Some of those entities. But our biggest components are, the pensions, the OPEB liability. So we can break that down for you.
I'd like to. I mean, from a business standpoint, when I look at it, if I'm hiring somebody at X amount of dollars, and I really have to anticipate that we're going to be, the cost of that person is going to be really X plus about 3/4 of X, right? I mean, that one person's got.
Correct, sir. Whenever we are doing that analysis, whenever we're getting staff requests, that we're looking at both the salary and the benefit additions related to that, and roughly what 765 is related to Social Security and that, that element as well, related to your wages.
Good. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, Brian, thank you, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
That concludes our budget workshop for today.
All right. We can go home.